I remember being in that place and realizing wherever you are as a runner or whatever role it plays in your life, to realize at the end of the day, it's just running. It's not everything, and you've got to be okay without it.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who once ate Cold Stone ice cream 3 hours before a track workout, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me for episode 14 of the Running for Real podcast. Now, last week we talked to Jessie Barr, who was an Olympic 4x4 runner, and she's actually mostly a hurdler, which is kind of interesting. But the primary reason I wanted her on was because she's done a lot of research on the identity crisis that we kind of go through when we're injured, retired, and it was just really interesting to see how the two kind of interlock together, and we could use her advice with what she has learned to actually apply to all of us as runners. So it was really, really great to learn, and you also get to learn about what it's like to run in the Olympics. So this week, I wanted to talk to one of the voices of our sport, I guess, and he's someone who's not afraid to speak his mind, which I really look up to. You guys know I appreciate that. And we'll go into some of those topics today. Mario Fraioli is someone I've looked up to for quite a while, but he's someone who's always behind the scenes. So today I thought I would bring him to the front of the scene. So after a quick word from our sponsor, V, who I'm hoping you have checked out by now, remember, if you do check out the Get V website, that really helps me, especially if you use my link, which is getv.com/running4 That really, really helps me. And if you do decide to purchase AV, that tells them that they're doing the right thing by supporting me and sponsoring me. So thank you so much in advance to anyone who does that. Thank you for supporting me and the podcast. Let's get on with the interview. Technology has come a long way. And later in the show, you're going to get to meet one of the best advances for running I've ever seen. And you're going to love her. If you have to train on your own a lot, like I did, V will be just what you need. Check out getvi.com for more information. Mario, thank you so much for being here today on the Running for Real podcast. I am very excited to have you here and looking forward to this chat today.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Tina.
It's funny, I said Mario, but if I was going back to my actual accent, do you know what I'd say? I'm sure you hear this all the time.
No,
what
do
British people say? You haven't noticed? We say it differently.
I have plenty of British friends, but I've never really noticed that they say it differently. Now that I'll pay attention to it.
We say Mario.
That doesn't sound too different to me.
Mario. No, Mario. I'm getting confused now. Mario. We say Mario. But I feel like when I say that in America, people kind of look at me and think I'm talking about the little character. So I don't say it anymore.
It's not as bad as the folks from New York who are like, Mario.
Yes, very pronounced.
I think that's a little more prominent, but that's interesting.
So other than sharing a name with a little stocky man with a moustache, what fun fact or hidden talent do you have for us here?
Well, parlaying off that, I'll give you two. My dad's name is Mario as well, and he is a plumber, and he does have a mustache, and I always thought that was pretty funny. Oh. But for me, I guess hidden talent, something that people wouldn't know, is growing up, basketball was my first love from the time I was probably 6-7 years old, and I was just obsessed with it. And I played in youth leagues from the time I was 6-7 through junior high school. I actually transferred high schools so that I could play on the basketball team. And I was all in, and I would carry a basketball with me everywhere, like around school. I had one in my locker. I slept with one in my bed. I'm not ashamed to admit that. And once I got into running, which I'm sure we'll get into later on in this podcast, but that was about midway through high school when I started running competitively. I dropped basketball pretty quickly, but I've always still been interested in it, and have a lot of respect for basketball players. And it's funny, I don't play anymore, but I can still, if someone throws me a ball, instinct takes over, and I can do all sorts of pretty wild ball handling tricks and skills and spins and most people don't know that about me.
So have you ever been in a situation where you've been like with a group of runners and they've been like, oh, let's play like a pickup game of basketball, and you're like, oh, yeah, sure. And then you get out onto the court and they're just like, whoa, where was that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely happened. Not recently. It's been a couple of years, but I've been in that situation before where I've caught people off guard and by surprise with what I can do with the ball.
Yeah, I bet. Well, that's pretty cool. So I want to, not go back quite that far, but, many people might know you originally as the senior editor at Competitor magazine. So even though we're going to go on to talk about what you're doing now, maybe we could start with that and kind of say, for an editor or senior editor at Competitor, what would like a typical day involve? Because I think most people, they read running articles, but they have no idea what kind of goes into it.
Sure. It's an interesting question. I started at Competitor in 2010, and I worked there for 6 years until last year. It was almost exactly a 6-year stint that I was at competitormagazine.com. And I started as the web editor, not necessarily senior editor. And at the time, the Competitor brand was split, digital and print, and there was no real synergy between the two. And a little less than 2 years after I started, Brian Metzler came on as the editor-in-chief, and we made Competitor into this cohesive print and digital running brand, and I got promoted to senior editor. And for me, my main responsibility was all of our training content on the website and the magazine, which was a majority of the content that we would put out. So I would manage that. I would create a lot of it myself. And then in addition to that, I would do a lot of what I would call elite athlete coverage or coverage of the sport, where I would visit or attend events, I should say, such as New York City Marathon, Boston Marathon, Olympic trials, and things of that nature, and provide coverage and commentary on the event and interview the athletes and write profiles and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, that's kind of a high level view of what I would do as a senior editor. Mostly manage the training content, create a lot of it, and deal with anything that was in the realm of athletes and events.
Mm-hmm. And what was your favorite part of that job?
I got to travel a lot.
So that was a good thing? Because sometimes people say that's not so much a good thing, traveling.
I think so. For me, it allowed me to see most of this country and many parts of the world that I otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to experience. And for that, I'm extremely grateful, and it was just really neat. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think most of us don't really realize kind of when you do work for a company like Competitor, you do get to travel around a lot. And I know I've had Chris Heusler on, who's run Westin, on my podcast before. And, now I kind of pay attention to him traveling around. I see just how far and how often he actually travels around. So it's kind of, it's one of those jobs where obviously you're away from your family and away from home, but there's so many perks of traveling and getting to explore the world. So
yeah, there's definitely a balance. I mean, it was exhausting at times and stressful, because I remember there were some months where I was gone 18 days out of the month. Wow. And that wasn't typical. That wasn't every month, but it did happen from time to time where I would be gone for a week at a time. I'd be home for 2 days, and then I'd be gone for another week. Mm-hmm. And that can certainly get exhausting, but looking back at it, I don't know that I would have traded any of those experiences.
Okay. And then when it came to, the posts of the articles themselves, are there any, crazy ones that kind of came up on your desk that you can remember that you were like, what the heck is this? Do I have to print this? Or I don't want to print this, but.
That's a great question. Without exposing anyone. You can just say the topic. Yeah, we would get crazy pitches all the time. Early on in my days at Competitor, we had a very strong connection with the Rock and Roll Marathon series, which Competitor Group also owned. So a lot of our content, our recovery content, would show up on the Rock and Roll results page. And that was by design. It was to send them over to our website with relevant content in terms of recovery. And if people had questions, I was the first point of contact. And I remember getting an email from a woman after a half marathon, and she said, I just finished a half marathon in Virginia Beach, and I've got this bulge coming out of my stomach area from the race. What do you think it is? And how do you suggest I treat it? And I was like, I think you should go see a doctor right away. I can't help you. But just, all sorts of crazy stuff like that, which isn't necessarily content, but some of the stuff that I would deal with. But from from an editorial perspective, you get pitched every day by dozens of people, and it can become, it could be a full-time job in itself, just sorting through a lot of that, people pitching products that they've invented or causes that they are committed to, whatever it may be. I saw it all.
I'm sure you did. And then, so what made you decide to kind of move on to your own thing eventually at that 6-year mark?
Yeah, well, at this time last year, I was actually recruited to join a coaching company here in the Bay Area where I live, or to help start a coaching company in the Bay Area where I live. And they made it as such that I could afford to leave my job at competitor. And I was just ready for something new. Mm-hmm. I think 6 years is a healthy amount of time to be at a place. And I was really proud of what we had done, but it just felt like the right time for me to move on and take on a new challenge. So that was the impetus behind me stepping away at the time.
Yeah. Okay. And we're going to go on to kind of talk about your coaching in a minute. But firstly, I kind of want to talk about your career and maybe some of your highlights. Sure. So maybe tell the audience, if they don't know, if they haven't seen your name around, a bit about your personal running career.
My own personal running career. Well, I started, as I had alluded to, in high school, and I joined the cross country team as a junior in high school to keep in shape for basketball. I was working with a basketball coach who advised me to do that, told me because cross country was in the fall that it would help my conditioning for the winter basketball season. And I'd never run long distance before, really, and we didn't have much of a coach at the high school that I was at, but I realized pretty quickly that I love to compete. I love to race. We didn't really train all that much. We would have 2 dual meets a week, and we wouldn't run in between those 2 events. And when we did run in training, it was usually 2 to 4 miles. We didn't do speed work. We didn't do hills. It was really going out for a jog on the streets around the school. And then we would race twice a week. But I had some success at it, and I enjoyed that success. It really sort of fueled me. That year, my junior year, I missed qualifying for the state cross country meet. You could qualify as an individual by 1 place. So I was just out of the running for the state championship. So I set a goal for myself to not only qualify for the next year's state championship, but I wanted to win it, which was pretty brash because I hadn't even qualified the year before. I couldn't get out of our own district. And I really thought about that a lot. I'd gotten some general interest letters from colleges that, in retrospect, I realized weren't addressed to me. They were just, colleges would send these. Yeah, they would just send these letters to a coach and say, hey, do you have anyone who might be interested in running at the Division 2 or 3 collegiate level? But I thought that was pretty cool because in terms of basketball, I wasn't getting anywhere close to that kind of interest. So very quickly, I shifted gears and stepped away from the basketball team and started running indoor track. And indoor track led to outdoor track. And then I trained the next summer heading into my senior year. And I didn't win the state championship, but I finished 7th, which was a big improvement from the year before when I couldn't get out of the district. And I knew at that point that I wanted to run in college and I wanted to continue competing. I didn't know how far I could take it, but I wanted to see how far I could get and how far I could go. So from there, I moved on to Stonehill College in Massachusetts, which is a Division II school. I went there largely because I knew I could run on the team. I improved a lot in high school, but I still wasn't like Division I college material. So Stonehill was Division II. I knew I could run there. They had a history of cross country and track, but it wasn't a real deep history. I think the school record in the mile at the time was 4:31. This is for the college. And they had never gone to a national championship, but I liked the school. I liked that it was an hour away from home. I liked that I could run there. And I knew that I was committed to becoming a better runner. And so I went to Stonehill. I was fortunate in that, for track anyway, that I had a great coach in Karen Bowen, who eventually took over both programs and coached me for cross country my junior and senior year there. but personally, I improved a lot in college, made a big jump from my senior year of high school to my freshman year of college. And by the time I graduated, I was an All-American in cross country and had qualified for the national championships, Division II national championships, in the mile. And again, knew at that point that I wanted to continue running. I knew that I wanted to do something career-wise in running, whether it was as an athlete or a coach or working in the industry somehow, even though I didn't have a very clear idea at the time what that was. And I've just, that was 2004, and I've just kept at it ever since. And, my own competitive running in the past few years, I still race. I still like to compete. I don't train nearly as hard as I used to. We can certainly get into that here in a bit, but I've been able to make a career out of running as a coach and a writer. And that's something I'm deeply grateful for.
Yeah, definitely. And then so someone listening who is in a kind of maybe a similar situation, they're coming out of college, or maybe they've just, maybe they are, 30, 35 years old and just taken up running, and they think, okay, I'm really passionate about this. I want to do something in this, but I'm not good enough to, run for Nike or be a professional runner who's paid $100,000 a year to just run. So what advice would you give to someone like that?
First piece of advice I would give is to make sure that you have some semblance of balance in your life overall. I didn't, and ultimately that led me down a bad road, and I made some mistakes that ultimately affected my ability to have a competitive running career in my early to mid 20s, but also provided me a lot of lessons that I've been able to apply as a coach. So I guess I'm grateful for those experiences, but having a balance in your life, I think, is super important. Being committed to it, but also having other interests outside of running that, as I said, help balance you out, but also help sustain you. And that will give you something to focus on and pursue when your running career or when your best running days are eventually over, because that day comes for all of us. And I feel like there are a lot of athletes out there who are able to make a career out of it, but then that career is over and they don't know where to go. So giving yourself something to focus on down the road and developing an ability to roll with the punches. You're going to hit a lot more downs than you will ups. Most people will anyway, at least initially, and realizing that's part of the process and being okay with it and not letting it knock you, even though you're down, not letting it knock you off track.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And particularly, what you were saying about balance, I think for anyone listening who is kind of a bit confused with what Mario means by that, I've definitely been there, and I'm sure, most runners in some capacity have been there. And we're talking about where you kind of get to the point where you say, I really need to run well. This is all I want. I want this so bad. You start changing things. You start saying, I'm not going to go out for dinner with friends because I don't want to eat anything bad that might affect my training. Or you might say, I can't go swimming today because if I go swimming, that's going to take energy away from my running. And you just start to get to the point where every decision in your life is dictated by your training. And when you get to that point, it doesn't matter what level you're at. You are in a danger zone. You are a ticking time bomb. It's only a matter of time until something in your body breaks. And when it does, your world is going to come crashing down. So it's really important to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I could have said that any better. And that was certainly me as an athlete, but now as a coach who works with a wide range of runners from age groupers, competitive age groupers to elites. I see it all the time. And it's easy for me to identify because I remember being in that place myself and realizing, I think it's important wherever you are as a runner or whatever role it plays in your life to realize at the end of the day, it's just running. It's not everything. And you've got to be okay without it if that ends up being the case. Because there are going to be periods of time when if you're injured, you can't do it. And you've got to have something else to fall back on, to focus on, to excite you, to keep you happy. Like you can't let your entire identity, all of your happiness, all of those things be tied to running.
Absolutely.
It's not a healthy approach, and it's not sustainable.
And I'm sure I get quite a lot of emails from people saying, I want this so bad. I'm doing everything I can to be the best I can be. I'm really committed. Other people aren't committed and I'm so committed. I do this, I do that. And, I want to say to them, like, back off. I know you're trying to show me how much you love running and that's wonderful. But if you go too far, you are just asking for trouble, like we said. So I'm sure you see that quite a lot as a coach. And let's kind of go on to you being a coach. You have some quite famous athletes, and maybe you could tell us a bit about who you are working with right now and maybe your role in the Olympics, because I'm sure people would love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I've been coaching for, I guess, 13 years now, since 2004. I really got started very loosely when I graduated from college, and I've never stopped since. If anything, it's what I do now. Mm-hmm. It's how I spend most of my day. It's what, sustains my livelihood from a financial standpoint is coaching. And I work with 25 athletes, currently one-on-one. I coach a couple groups here in the Bay Area where I live, but I coach a range of athletes, not true beginners. I've sort of gotten away from that, but a wide range of competitive athletes, from age groupers that most people would have never heard of to some fairly recognizable pros, especially on the trail and ultra scene, from Caroline Bowler and Tim Tollefson, Maggie Walsh, Io Wang, trying to make sure, Sally McRae, and some others that I don't think I forgot anyone there, but a lot of those folks have qualified for the Olympic trials. They've been on podiums at international races on the trails, or have won national titles, or represented the U.S. internationally. Mm-hmm. And rewinding a bit, I don't work with him anymore, even though we're still friends, but I worked with Cesar Lozano from Costa Rica from 2011 till 2015 and coached him to the London Games in the marathon and helped him set a range of PRs from 5K through half marathon in the time that we worked together. So, I've certainly spent quite a bit of time at that end of the sport and working with those types of athletes. But, I also have other athletes who are trying to break 3 hours in the marathon or qualify for Boston, finish their first 50K or 50 mile. And I really enjoy working with all of them. To me, in my eyes, they're all athletes who are striving to do something they haven't done before, to be better versions of themselves. And that's a really exciting position for me to be in as someone who's helping them along that path.
Mm-hmm. And when you were a miler in college and I guess in high school, would you have imagined now that you'd be coaching ultra marathoners?
No. God, if you had asked me that, even, let's say I moved to the Bay Area 3.5 years ago. If you had asked me that 3.5 years ago on one day, I would have said no, because it just wasn't really on my radar. It wasn't anything I was interested in athletically myself. And I didn't really know anyone who did ultra marathons, but there's a real community here in the Bay Area around trail running and ultramarathon running, and some of the best runners in the country live within a few miles of me, and I've gotten to meet many of those folks and some others because of that. And I've within 3 months of me living here, I ran my first 50K and ran 2 within my first year of living here. So it's become a big part of my life now, and it is something that I've taken an interest in and am excited to explore further from a coaching perspective, but also myself as an athlete. I still have not, and I'm not shy about this. I still have not raced over 50K, which is, most people wouldn't even consider that ultra distances if you're really serious about the sport. I do, but I'm looking forward to trying out longer races, maybe 50 miles later this year myself, and experiencing that. But it's funny, I've coached people to 100 mile races with great success. Not to pat myself on the back without ever actually having even come close to doing it, but trying to understand what the demands of that race are and looking at how people have prepared for them in the past, and just trying to use my own experience and intuition to understand, how it can be done better or how things can be tweaked. That's part of what drives me as a coach and keeps me excited.
Absolutely, which is one of the main features you want to see in a coach, is someone who wants to continuously learn and isn't kind of stuck in their ways of this is the only way to do things. So then let's talk about that a bit. For someone who's listening and maybe they're kind of on the fence of whether they should get a coach, be it you or someone else, what are your thoughts on someone hiring a coach? Like, should you be a certain level or, amount of time you've been running? Is it someone who is kind of stuck or a certain distance? What are your thoughts on who needs a coach?
Yeah, well, I think in looking at a coach, the first thing you shouldn't look for are, what their own athletic accomplishments were, what certifications they have or degrees they might hold. I'm not saying that stuff isn't important, but it shouldn't be the primary driver behind that relationship. The primary driver behind the relationship should be the relationship and finding someone that you connect with on a deeper level, who you can communicate with regularly and effectively, who understands you as an athlete or will take the time to better understand you as an athlete, what your motivations are, your training background, what your goals are. We'll put some serious thought into figuring out how to bridge those gaps, and that's got to be at the heart of it all, because without that strong relationship, without that constant communication, without that curiosity on behalf of the coach, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. I don't think everyone needs a coach. I really don't. I think some folks are experienced enough as an athlete, are willing to do their own research and learn, and can be somewhat objective can look at their own training and racing somewhat objectively, but not everyone can. But I do think having an objective outsider, essentially, to help guide you on the path to your goal, to tell you, when to back off or when to push a little bit harder. There are both types of athletes. There are those athletes who need to be kicked in the butt, and most runners, I would say, are probably the opposite. They need to be held back, especially if they're really driven. And, I think a coach can certainly help in that regard. I mean, many of the athletes I work with, I end up having to tame their enthusiasm more than anything else, because it's that enthusiasm and that drive, that has helped them improve and make them so good that has also been the source of their undoing. So, having a coach who can really understand that, or having someone who can really understand that and help you find that balance where your training is productive, where it's enjoyable, and where it's, where you're seeing progress, whatever that means for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also important to look at their other athletes that they are working with. Are they having success? If other athletes they're working with, you keep seeing that they're always injured, or they're, really struggling all the time, maybe that isn't someone that you want to work with, like you mentioned, I think the source of it all should be that relationship. It has to be whether you gel with someone. If you're the kind of person who likes someone to yell at you if you have a bad run and that motivates you, and you go for someone who's very gentle and kind of like, oh, it's fine, it'll be okay, it's not going to work with you. You really have to, like Mario said, find someone who has that good relationship with you.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any one right approach. There are a lot of different approaches that work for different athletes. And I'll tell a prospective new athlete in our first phone call, hey, there's a chance I may not be the best coach for you, and that's okay. And if I know that's not me and I can help you find who that person is, then great. But I do think, there has to be a blending of personalities, and you have to really align on that level, or long term it's just not going to work. I mean, I've had athletes email me saying, what degrees do you have? What coaching certifications? All that sort of stuff. And I just say, hey, here are some of the athletes that I've coached. If you want to reach out to them and ask them about their experience, I think that's probably going to give you more valuable information than, what my academic resume looks like. Because that's really what's going to make this relationship fruitful, is that you feel good about it, and that it's that we're working towards something together.
Yep. Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yep, no, that does. And then what about if someone is thinking about like a trail race? If, as you kind of are starting to understand this, or a lot of your athletes do trail races, are there any additional things someone should look for if they're looking for a coach who's going to work with them and they have a trail race coming up, or an ultra?
Yeah, just that on some level, there are a lot of similarities and there is overlap in terms of training and some of the types of workouts that you do. But trail specifically, there's there's another skill set that you need to develop as far as learning how to navigate off-road terrain, which I think a lot of that comes from experience and, finding a coach who has experience with that stuff, whether it's as an athlete or they've worked with many athletes who, have raced on the trails and can tell you the things to look out for, the considerations you need to make, the requisite skills that you need to develop to be successful over that type of terrain. And then I think with ultra distance racing is, finding someone who's going to be honest with you about what it takes to have a good experience at those distances. And you hear a lot about the marathon, respect the distance. And I feel like in ultra running, that takes on a whole new meaning, and doesn't necessarily mean you need to start running more, but it means that your training has to be tailored toward the specific demands of that event, and that those specific demands may be well beyond what you believe them to be. So
That's definitely helpful. Thank you. Right. So something I wanted to talk to you about, one thing that I really respect about you, and I love reading anything that you write, is that you're someone who speaks their mind. You don't shy away from things just if they are kind of difficult to talk about, which a lot of people in the running world do. So one thing that you do like to do is your morning shakeout, which you do once a week. Maybe you can tell the listeners a bit about that, and what kind of thing you do, and what made you kind of decide to start doing it, just so anyone listening can kind of learn more and sign up so they can get it every week.
Yeah. So the morning shakeout is my weekly newsletter that goes out on Tuesday mornings, and it's gone out every Tuesday morning as of this conversation the last 83 weeks. So 83 weeks in a row it's gone out. And I started it while I was still at Competitor, actually. And it was really a kind of a creative outlet for me to be able to write about, essentially the things that I'm interested in, and running is definitely the topic that I'm probably most interested in, but I'll riff on other things from other sports and just things that I've read throughout the week that may or may not have something to do with running, podcasts I've listened to, things that, either, intrigue me or inspire me on some level. But also if there's something that's topical that I feel like I can lend some insight on or provide commentary around, I'll do that. And, it started as just this little, I guess, side project, 83 weeks ago. And now it's become, it's something that has become a lot bigger.
It's wildly successful, definitely.
Yeah. I've got 4,000 subscribers now, like an extremely high, open rate, and people are really engaged with it and look forward to getting it every week. And I now sell sponsorship around it. So, it is, aside from coaching, it is the other way, which I, sustain myself on a professional level. And, I put a lot of work into it. But it's really, if I had to describe it, it's a personality driven newsletter. And, one of my readers described it as unpredictably interesting. And I think that's a pretty accurate description, because I really don't even know what I'm going to write about till I sit down and start writing about it. I've got, collections of links and things that I've read and listened to, and opinions that I've formed around various topics that I sit down every week and I hash those things out, and then I share them with everyone who's subscribed to the newsletter. So
no, it's great. And
I just try to be honest and open, and without being mean.
No, you definitely come across that way. It's a great read, and I really look forward to reading it. And I set some time aside on a Tuesday to make sure I sit down and read it. And for anyone listening, I will put links in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 14. And, it really is worth a read. And he's honest, like he said, this isn't some, biased post about a certain topic that someone has been paid for. Like, he literally says what's on his mind, and it's really a great read. So if you want something a bit more real, which you should, if you're listening to this podcast, then that's definitely one to go check out. So I wanted to ask you about one difficult topic. So you are someone who is, like I said, is okay speaking their mind. So what are your thoughts on the doping situation in the running world?
Oh, $1 million question. Probably one I get the most often.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Well, I think it's a massive problem in sports in general, but specific to athletics, and under that I'll group track and field and marathoning and even trail and ultra running now. It's been hugely problematic for a long time. Decades. Yep. And now we're at a point where testing has gotten a lot better, both in and out of competition. People are being scrutinized a bit more for cheating. And, I think any steps that can be taken to help clean up the sport and level it off are great. I don't know that we'll ever fully get to that point, but doping has been a problem in running for a long time. And that's unfortunate because, I think it not only does it damage the reputation of the sport, but it affects people's lives and their careers and their ability to, make a career out of it, because there have been a lot of clean athletes who have been cheated out of prize money or opportunities or, their moment on the medal stand and all of those things. So, I like that there is now a pretty strong movement around clean sport. There are a lot of athletes, coaches, and this is at the professional and the age group level, brands, especially now, who are taking a stand against doping and supporting clean sport and not tolerating cheaters in their events or sponsoring them. Not all these brands are, and not all these events are, but we're seeing more of them showing a commitment to promoting a clean sport. And I think that's very important.
Yep, definitely. And I think that is important. And I will put a link in the show notes about the kind of clean sport movement, just in case anyone hasn't seen it but is interested. So did you find when you were maybe at competitor, or even now, when you do see an athlete who does, especially well, that your mind almost kind of automatically jumps to the skeptical kind of, I don't know about that? Or do you feel like it's tarnished your view of the sport at all at the top?
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit my view is definitely jaded. It's hard you don't know what to believe anymore. And that's what's unfortunate about the whole thing. In track and field, in cycling, in baseball, you name it. There's just been so many instances in the last few years where we find out after the fact that what we thought we saw wasn't what we actually saw. And we've seen that enough that it really shapes your perspective. So, when you see this incredible performance, for me anyway, the first reaction is, was it clean? And I hate that that's how I think, but, there's just been too many instances in recent history where, I've seen stuff like that, and then you come to find out that it just wasn't true. So you just don't know what to believe anymore. And that's unfortunate. And, that's not me saying that everyone in sports is doping or everyone in running is doping. That's certainly not the case. No. There are plenty of people that I believe are doing it right, and you can believe their performances, but they're also lumped in with people who have been found to have cheated their way to a performance or to a medal. And it's become really hard to know what's believable and what's not.
Definitely. And I think, many of us are kind of struggling with the same thing of not knowing. You want to see the best in people, but it's kind of hard not to look at it with kind of just a very critical eye and always think the worst of people. And what are your thoughts on the gray area that's kind of in the media a lot now, where it's kind of things that are maybe prescribed, but should they really be prescribed? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a bigger problem than most people want to believe. Mm-hmm. And I don't think this is necessarily a new thing either. I think this sort of behavior has likely been going on for a long time. It's just now coming to the surface and getting looked at, through a different lens and being scrutinized further. And it's just, all of this is ethical, right? It's technically, some of these behaviors aren't breaking the rules as they're written, but it's the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. And, I think in many cases, some of these instances of TUEs or people taking things that they may or may not need, but provide a performance enhancement. It's very gray, and it's against the spirit. I think it's against the spirit of the law and the spirit of the sport. And, but you have people who look at it and say, well, the rules say this and I'm doing that. And, based on that, I'm not cheating. And yeah, I guess you're not, but at the same time, you're not playing on a level playing field either.
Do you see any solutions here? Like you mentioned that you didn't think it would ever properly go away, but do you see any solutions other than increased testing?
Yeah, well, I think, increased testing, yes, but I think there just needs to be greater transparency in general by the athletes. Like, I don't think, there's privacy in terms of medical records, and, you don't want to let everyone know, like, these are all things that I take. But I think as a professional athlete, or as someone who is competing for, prize money or sponsorship money, or, spots on a podium, I do think that information should be readily available. It should be transparent. Like, you should be able to ask an athlete anytime, like, all right, tell me what you're taking and why. And people will always have an answer for things, but, I think at least at that point, it's like, it's clear that, it would become clear that more people than we think are doing things that are in this, are in the vein of performance enhancement, even though it's not necessarily illegal performance enhancement. But I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense or that I'm getting my point across, but I just think there needs to be a greater transparency in general. And that, I generally think if an athlete feels like if it seems like they're hiding something, they're probably hiding something.
Yeah, definitely.
And, I don't think athletes should have to hide anything. Like, why can't we be open and honest about these things, so that we know?
Yep. Nope. That's great. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. I know not many people are willing to kind of talk about that, as it's, such a touchy subject right now. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. So we're just going to take a moment to thank our sponsor, and then we will be back for the final four. Catching up with friends on a run is one of the best feelings a runner can experience. The miles fly by, you feel good, and it just becomes so much easier to keep going. They push you to be better, and you push them to be better. But for most of us, those runs are few and far between. So how do you stay motivated when it's just you and your thoughts? Wouldn't it be nice to have someone alongside you, pushing you when you need it most? Well, running on your own can be tough to stay motivated, and I'm excited to introduce to you a new friend of mine, someone I know you're going to love, V. V is the coach in your ear, and she doesn't talk all stiff like a robot, but she talks like a real person. She'll give you advice, let you know how you're doing, and actually talk to you like a friend would, in an encouraging way, but still pushing you to do your best, not letting you off the hook when the going gets tough. But she also knows everything about you, so won't let you overtrain yourself either, which I know many of us are guilty of. You can find out more and enter to win your very own V at getv.com/running for real. That's getvi.com/running for real. All right, Mario, just 4 more questions for you in the Running for Real 4, starting with a unique nutrition tip. Anything that you'd like to share?
My unique nutrition tip, and this is very personal to me, but if you are a coffee drinker, do not detox yourself before a race. You're just going to be cranky and miserable, and it may or may not enhance your performance afterwards. So for me, I mean, our listeners can't see the shirt that I have on. I have my Compass Coffee Roasting shirt on. I'm a big coffee drinker. I enjoy it. And for me, I feel like I would be a grumpier person if I were off coffee for a week, and that's not worth the whatever performance benefits like being off it for a while would provide. So
okay, well, that's good to know. And I guess that means for any audience members who are listening and thinking, who'd heard about this coffee taper and thought, oh, I don't know if I could do this. Well, now you have if you are in the same boat as Mario, maybe it's just not worth it. Okay, what about a running for real moment? Maybe a moment you were embarrassed, or kind of running just really was brought to life for you and it just only a runner would understand.
This year's Boston Marathon. I had a rough race by all accounts, and things went south pretty early, like around 6 miles. I struggled in the heat and really just unraveled pretty quickly, and spent the last 18, 20 miles of the race trying to just figure out how I was going to make it to the finish line. And it was just a really humbling experience. I wanted to quit many times. For me, I walked for the first time ever, in a race. I walked the last 5 aid stations. And it was just very humbling. It was just a very real moment. It was my slowest, by far my slowest marathon, but it's also the one I think I'm probably most proud of, because I could have, when things started going south, especially because it was so early, I could have just thrown in the towel.
And you
many
probably
times.
wanted to, right? Like at
points?
points?
Yeah. Many times. I wanted to, and I didn't. And, looking back on that, I'm proud that I finished. I learned a lot from that entire, experience. And I think whether you're, a novice or you're super experienced or professional or whatever it may be, I think, I think anyone can relate with that experience.
So what was it that kept you going when you were having those thoughts that early in the race?
Just will and figuring, just knowing that finishing was, was a big deal on that day. I don't know. I just, I put a lot of work in it. I put a lot of work into it. And even though I wasn't close to the time goal that I wanted to hit, I don't know, I just wanted to finish. I knew there was going to be some pride in finishing, and I didn't want to regret dropping out. So I don't know, just found a way.
Nope, that's good. And I think that is actually what a lot of the time it comes down to, is just that stubbornness that we have as runners, not to give up. So, and what about a high moment? Tell us about something that meant a lot to you in your running career.
As an athlete myself, I think my senior year in college, my team, we qualified for the national championship as a team for the first time in school history. And it was my last season at the school. And to put it in perspective, when I was a freshman 4 years earlier, we couldn't be thinking about nationals. We finished next to last in all of New England in cross country. And we're kind of the laughing stock of the region. And to be a part of the first team in school history to qualify for nationals, and to have a team of guys beyond just the scoring 7, all committed to the same goal. Everyone was all in on it, just to be part of the team, and to feel like I contributed to that bit of success is something I'll always be really proud of.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I actually, the first time my school, who was also a Division 2, qualified for nationals, it was the first time since 1980 something. So when we did it, the same thing as you, as a team, it was an incredible feeling knowing that all of you would work so hard together and you'd done it. So definitely, thank you for sharing. All right, and finally, what do you tell yourself when you're standing on the start line?
Don't freak out. And I think. And I think racing well is a matter of not freaking out. And that doesn't just go for elite athletes. It goes for anyone who's ever stepped on a starting line and has a goal for that day. And to go back to my Boston Marathon experience, even though it was apparent to me very early on that things were not going my way, I never freaked out. And I think I think that's what allowed me to finish. I think if I did freak out, and I gave into that, I would have just stepped off the course and been done really early. But, even in my best races, you get to these moments where, you feel this sudden surge of adrenaline and you might want to go, but you still have a long way to go. So you've just got to not freak out and know when to hold yourself back. Or, if you're in a tight pack of people, and it can just be really stressful when you're in such close quarters, just keeping yourself relaxed. So the last thing I tell myself before I go off the line is just don't freak out. And I'll usually remind myself of that multiple times throughout the race.
That's good advice, definitely. All right, and one more thing. I get my guests on the show to send me a photo of themselves in a power pose. So that's something that you would maybe do on the start line to build your confidence or not freak out. Or, maybe if you were just trying to make yourself feel good, maybe hands on the hips, maybe hands on the head, maybe some kind of Usain Bolt lightning or something. Will you send us your power pose to put on the show notes?
Yeah, I'll have to, I might have to stage that power pose. I don't know that I have one
I'm sure Nate Helming has some great ideas for you.
My own files. Yeah. If I can't find one, I will give Nate a call. He lives just up the road from me, and I will have him shoot my power pose.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd love that. So for anyone listening, Nate was on episode 5 or 6, I think it was, from the Run Experience, and Mario and Nate are good friends, so that's why I thought I'd bring that one up. Okay, Mario, thank you so much for sharing today. If anyone wants to find out more information about you, I will put a link in the show notes to your website, but maybe you could tell people where they can find you if they are interested in learning more.
Yeah, all the usual social handles, Twitter, Instagram. I'm just at my name, Mario Fraioli, all one word, MarioFraioli. Website of the same address, mariofraioli.com. And then themorningshakeout.com is where you can sign up for my newsletter, read back issues, read pieces that I've pulled out of it and reposted to the website. And I think that about covers it.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now make sure you go back and sign up to the Morning Shakeout. You will not regret it. It's one of the only email lists that I'm actually subscribed to, and it's definitely a good place to hear the running news each week without getting it from a biased perspective. He really does just share his mind, tell you what's going on, and keep you up to date. So it's really good. You can find everything Mario and I talked about at tinamuir.com/episode 14. And I wanted to ask you, have you joined the Superstars group yet on Facebook? Now, if you don't know what this is, I am building a Facebook community, and I think we have over 1,500 members by now, but I want to keep seeing your faces come in there. So if you are a fan of the podcast and you do use Facebook, come join the community. You can find links in the show notes, which again will be tinamuir.com/episode 14, or you can search for Running for Real on Facebook, and you should be able to find it. There is a picture of a Saucony shoe. That's how you will know that it is the one. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. If you are in the Superstars group, I really look forward to getting to know you more, and I've been enjoying getting to know you as it is. I hope you will have a wonderful week, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.